There's a moment that arrives quietly, almost like watching something from a distance, when the clock approaches midnight and everyone around you is counting down with champagne and expectations and declarations of transformation, and you're sitting there feeling nothing, not cynicism, not judgment, just a calm awareness that tomorrow is January 1st and nothing fundamental about your life will change because a calendar flipped a page. And while everyone else treats this night like a magical threshold, you're wondering why we collectively agreed to pretend that this particular midnight matters more than any other. You've probably felt it, that disconnect between the energy everyone else brings to this night and your own indifference to its supposed significance. The parties you're expected to attend, the resolutions you're supposed to make, the optimism you're supposed to feel about a fresh start, all of it feels performative to you. Feels like participating in a ritual whose meaning evaporated somewhere along the way, but everyone's still going through the motions because that's what you're supposed to do. People who treat New Year's Eve like a normal day aren't fun killers. They're not bitter or cynical or incapable of celebration. They're just fundamentally unmoved by arbitrary markers of time. They can't generate enthusiasm for a transition that exists only because humans decided to organize time into yearly segments and then decided that the end of one segment and beginning of another deserves fanfare. There's a psychology behind this that has nothing to do with being joyless, because treating New Year's Eve as ordinary isn't about hating celebration. It's about needing celebrations to be connected to something real rather than something calendrical. It's about recognizing that you're the same person on January 1st as you were on December 31st, that nothing external changed when the clock struck midnight, that any transformation you're capable of doesn't require waiting for a specific date on a calendar. Psychologists might call this low susceptibility to collective rituals, the inability to derive meaning from practices simply because they're shared or traditional. And for most people, collective rituals are powerful. They create a sense of belonging, of shared experience, of participating in something bigger than yourself. But for people who treat New Year's Eve normally, those collective rituals feel hollow when they're not connected to personal significance. They can't manufacture excitement just because everyone else is excited. They can't pretend a moment is meaningful just because culture says it should be. Most people who treat New Year's Eve normally didn't reject it consciously. They just never felt the magic others seemed to feel. They participated in the countdown as kids or teenagers or young adults and waited to feel something, waited for that sense of renewal or possibility or fresh beginning everyone talks about, and it just never came. The clock hit midnight, people kissed and cheered and made promises they wouldn't keep, and they felt the same as they did 5 minutes earlier, which is to say they felt fine but not transformed, present but not enchanted. And over time, they stopped pretending, stopped forcing themselves to participate in something that didn't resonate, stopped accepting invitations to parties that would drain them for a reason they didn't care about, stopped making resolutions they knew were statistically likely to fail within weeks because if they actually wanted to change something, they'd start when they were ready, not when a calendar told them to. There's a particular kind of freedom that comes with not caring about New Year's Eve, because you're not subject to the pressure that everyone else feels, the pressure to have plans, to be somewhere exciting, to be with someone special, to end the year on a high note and start the new one with optimism. You don't feel like a failure if you're alone that night. You don't feel like you're missing out if you're in bed before midnight. You don't feel obligated to perform enthusiasm you don't feel or make promises you don't intend to keep. And that freedom is confusing to people who do care, who plan their New Year's Eve weeks in advance, who curate the perfect evening, who craft their resolutions with hope and intention. They look at your indifference and interpret it as sadness, as cynicism, as you having given up on the possibility of change or joy or new beginnings. But you haven't given up on those things. You've just disconnected them from arbitrary dates. People who treat New Year's Eve normally often share something in common. They're focused on actual change rather than symbolic change. They know that transformation doesn't wait for permission from a calendar, that you can start new habits on a Tuesday in March, that you can end toxic patterns on a Thursday in October, that you can reinvent yourself on any random Wednesday when you actually feel ready, rather than on January 1st because you're supposed to feel ready. And this makes them frustrating to people who believe in the power of fresh starts, who need the symbolism of a new year to motivate change, who use the cultural moment as a catalyst for intentions they've been sitting on. Those people see New Year's as a gift, a socially sanctioned opportunity to begin again, and they can't understand why you won't accept that gift, why you'd rather treat it like any other day. There's also something about authenticity, about refusing to participate in experiences that don't genuinely move you just because participation is expected. When you treat New Year's Eve normally, you're making a quiet statement that your engagement with rituals has to be earned, that you won't perform enthusiasm just to fit in, that your time and energy are precious enough that you won't spend them on celebrations that feel hollow to you. And that authenticity has a cost, because it makes you seem like an outsider, like someone who doesn't get it, like someone who's missing the point. But you're not missing the point. You just disagree about what the point is. You think the point is genuine transformation and connection and meaning, and you can't find those things in a manufactured moment of collective optimism about a calendar change. But here's what people don't talk about. Treating New Year's Eve normally doesn't mean you never celebrate or never seek fresh starts. It just means you do those things when they're authentic rather than when they're scheduled. You might have powerful moments of transformation on random Tuesdays. You might decide to change your life on a Sunday morning in July. You might feel genuine optimism about the future on a Wednesday afternoon in April. But those moments are real because they arose from your actual readiness, not because a calendar told you it was time. And those authentic moments of change are often more sustainable than New Year's resolutions precisely because they're not tied to collective expectations or symbolic dates. They're tied to genuine readiness, to actual desire for change, to internal rather than external motivation. I remember the first time I stayed home on New Year's Eve without feeling like I was missing something. Everyone I knew was at parties or events or doing something special, and I was on my couch reading a book. And when midnight came, I barely noticed. No countdown, no champagne, no resolutions. Just another page turned in a book that was more interesting than any party I could have attended. And I expected to feel sad or lonely or like I had failed at life somehow, but I didn't. I felt peaceful. I felt like I was exactly where I wanted to be, doing exactly what I wanted to do. And the fact that it was New Year's Eve was completely irrelevant to my contentment. If you treat New Year's Eve normally, you know that feeling, that quiet satisfaction of opting out of collective enthusiasm without feeling like you're missing anything important. That recognition that you're not broken for not caring about something everyone else seems to care about. That your indifference isn't a lack. It's just a difference in what you find meaningful.
The hardest part about treating New Year's Eve normally is the judgment, because people interpret your lack of participation as you being depressed or cynical or antisocial. They assume something must be wrong with you if you don't want to celebrate this supposedly magical night. They offer pity when you say you're staying home. They try to convince you to come out anyway. They treat your preference as a problem that needs solving rather than a valid choice about how you want to spend your time. And their concern, while well-meaning, is based on a false assumption. The assumption that not caring about New Year's Eve means not caring about life or joy or possibility or connection. But those things aren't connected. You can be deeply engaged with life and completely indifferent to New Year's Eve. You can love celebration without loving this particular celebration. You can believe in fresh starts without believing they need to happen on January 1st. Here's what most people don't understand about those who treat New Year's Eve normally. They're not rejecting hope or possibility or new beginnings. They're rejecting the idea that those things are somehow more available on one specific night than they are on any other night. They're saying that transformation is available always, not just when a calendar says it's time. That you don't need a collective ritual to give you permission to change your life. That the most powerful changes happen when you're actually ready, not when society tells you you should be ready. And that's not pessimism, that's realism. That's understanding that sustainable change comes from internal motivation and genuine readiness, rather than external timing and collective pressure. Psychologists talk about something called intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation comes from within. You do something because it's meaningful to you, because it aligns with your values, because you genuinely want to. Extrinsic motivation comes from outside. You do something because others expect it, because it's what you're supposed to do, because there's social pressure. And people who treat New Year's Eve normally tend to operate primarily on intrinsic motivation. They won't do something just because it's traditional or expected. They need it to actually matter to them personally. And while this makes them seem difficult or antisocial or like they're not team players, it also means they're more authentic in their engagement with life. They only participate in things they genuinely care about, which means when they do participate, you know it's real. You know they're not just going through the motions. So what makes someone treat New Year's Eve normally while others see it as the most important night of the year? It's not about intelligence or life experience or level of happiness. It's about whether your brain responds to symbolic moments or requires actual significance before it generates enthusiasm. Some people are wired to find meaning in collective rituals, to feel the power of shared traditions, to derive motivation from culturally significant moments. Others need meaning to be personal rather than collective, to feel motivation arise from internal readiness rather than external timing. And neither is better or worse, they're just different ways of engaging with time and tradition and transformation, different requirements for what makes a moment feel meaningful rather than arbitrary. Here's the shift that matters. Treating New Year's Eve normally doesn't mean you're against celebration or resistant to change. It means you're selective about when and how you engage with both. You might celebrate wildly on a random Saturday in June because something genuinely good happened. You might commit to major life changes on a Tuesday in September because that's when you felt ready. You might experience profound optimism about your future on a Thursday in November for reasons that have nothing to do with calendars. Your moments of transformation are scattered throughout the year whenever they're authentic, rather than concentrated on one night because tradition says they should be. And that makes your relationship with change more sustainable because it's based on actual readiness rather than arbitrary timing. People who treat New Year's Eve normally aren't broken or depressed or cynical. They're just honest about what moves them and what doesn't. They're just unwilling to manufacture enthusiasm for something that feels meaningful to them. They're just operating from a belief that transformation is always available and doesn't need to wait for a culturally sanctioned moment to begin. And in a world that's increasingly filled with performative participation, with people doing things because they feel they should rather than because they want to, that honesty is rare. That refusal to pretend is valuable. That willingness to opt out of collective rituals that don't resonate is a form of integrity, even when it's misunderstood as apathy. So if you're someone who treats New Year's Eve like a normal day, stop apologizing for it. Stop letting people make you feel like something's wrong with you because you don't care about a calendar change. Stop forcing yourself to participate in celebrations that drain you for reasons you don't find meaningful. Your indifference isn't depression. Your lack of enthusiasm isn't cynicism. Your preference to spend the night however you want rather than however you're supposed to want isn't antisocial behavior. You're just someone who needs meaning to be real rather than symbolic, who needs motivation to be internal rather than external, who can't manufacture excitement just because a date has cultural significance. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing broken about that. There's just a difference in what makes moments feel important, and your moments happen when they happen, not when a calendar tells them to. New Year's Eve is just another night. January 1st is just another day. And transformation is available to you always, not just when everyone else is ready, not just when tradition says it's time, but whenever you actually are.
And that's not cynicism, that's freedom.